World War II, the most horrific event in human history. It didn't just change borders and politics, it changed daily life in Europe, and that includes football. Between 1939 and 1945, leagues collapsed, clubs lost players, stadiums were bombed, and international football disappeared. But football still continued in strange forms. Regional wartime leagues, military games, propaganda matches, and even games played under occupation. And today we're telling the full story on how the war began, what happened to football during the war, the most famous wartime matches, and how football came back after 1945. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content like that. To understand football during World War II, you need the timeline. In September of 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and suddenly Europe went from tense to fully mobilized. Now here's why football was instantly affected. Football was dependent on the exact things that war destroys: mass travel, large crowds, money and resources, safety, and most importantly, young men. And footballers were exactly the demographic being sent to fight. So in most countries, the first reaction was simple: football is going to stop. But what happened next is where it gets interesting. In England, the Football League had already started their 1939-40 season. But after just a few matches, literally about 3 match days, it was suspended. And the reason wasn't morality, it was fear. Because within weeks, Britain was preparing for bombing raids. The government believed stadiums could become a target, and there was also pressure to stop football because it looked unserious, while the country prepared for war. But then something unexpected happened. Football came back, not because the war got easier, but because governments realized something very important. Football kept morality stable. So England created wartime football. Regional competition, shorter travels, flexible squads, and this is where the weirdest football era begins. During World War II, footballers were not full-time footballers. Many were soldiers, workers, or firefighters. So clubs did something that was impossible to do today. They used guest players, meaning if a player is stationed in a city because of military service, he could play for the local club, even if he was signed to a rival. So you had situations where top players played for 3 to 6 clubs during the war. Rivals shared the same player in different weeks. Squads changed, teams sometimes didn't know who would show up until the match day. And here's a crazy detail: most wartime goals and appearances were not counted in official records. So there are players who scored dozens of goals during the wartime, but it basically doesn't exist statistically. Wartime football wasn't played in perfect stadiums. Some grounds were literally hit with bombs. One of the most famous examples is Old Trafford. In March of 1941, Old Trafford was bombed in the Manchester Blitz and badly damaged. Manchester United couldn't use their own stadium for years, so they actually played home matches at Main Road, the stadium of their rivals Manchester City. Imagine that today, Manchester United playing home games at the Etihad. That's how extreme wartime football was, and this wasn't rare. Across Britain, stadiums were damaged, repurposed, restricted, and in Europe, the destruction was even worse. By 1940, the war wasn't just a conflict, it was a total occupation. Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, then Belgium and the Netherlands, then France. Paris fell, and across Europe, football became a completely different thing depending on where you lived. In some countries, football was banned or heavily restricted. In others, football was allowed because occupying forces saw it as a way to control crowds. And in some places, football was used as propaganda. Because dictators and occupying governments understood one thing: football is a powerful tool. If people were watching the game, they're not protesting. If people are cheering, they're distracted. So football became part of the war machine in certain places. France is a perfect example. After France fell in 1940, the country was split. There was the German occupied force and there was Vichy France in the south. And football had to adapt to the split. Clubs struggled with travel restrictions, censorship, and player shortages. Some competitions continued, but the structure of French football during the war became chaotic, and the war damaged the sport's development for years. Italy is another key story. They won the 1934 and the 1938 World Cups, and the government used football heavily for national pride. But once the war escalated, Italy's football system collapsed. By 1943, Italy was in chaos. Mussolini was removed from power, the country split between Allied control areas and German controlled areas, and football became almost impossible to organize normally. Germany is the most controversial one, because domestic football continued throughout the war. Leagues were recognized into regional competition called Gauliga, and football was used to maintain the image of stability. But by 1944 and 1945, the war situation became so desperate that even Germany's football structure started collapsing. Players were drafted, bombing increased, travel became impossible, and in the final months, football basically disintegrated. And now we get to the most famous story in wartime football history. Kiev, 1942. Ukraine was under Nazi occupation. Local players, many linked to Dynamo Kiev, formed a team known as FC Start. They played matches against German military teams, and they kept winning. One match against a team called Flakelf ended 5-3. Later, this match became known as the death match. Now here's the honest, accurate part. The match happened, but the story was later mythologized. Some versions claimed that the players were executed immediately for winning, but that's not fully accurate. But several players were arrested later, and some did die in harsh conditions. The match became symbolic, not because football defeated the Nazis, but because it showed something simple. Even under occupation, local identity survived. And here's what people don't know. Football was played in a prisoner of war camps. Not always, not everywhere, but enough that it became a documented part of the wartime life. In some camps, football was allowed because it reduced tension. In others, prisoners organized matches themselves. And for soldiers, football was everywhere. British units played matches, German units played matches, Allied troops played matches. Football became the easiest sport to set up during the war, because all you needed was a ball, open space, and two teams. So while official football collapsed, informal football exploded. But when the war ended in 1945, football didn't just return, it had to be rebuilt. Stadiums needed repairs, clubs needed money, players returned from war, some never returned. League structures needed reorganizing. International football had to restart. In Britain, football slowly transitioned back. And by 1946 to 1947, normal league football returned. One of the biggest facts about post-war football is attendance. Crowds became massive. In Britain especially, the late 1940s had some of the highest average attendances in football history. Because after years of wars, people wanted communal entertainment. Football became one of the biggest weekly events in society again. And the World Cup was cancelled in 1942 and 1946. It didn't return until 1950. That means that an entire generation of players missed the World Cup years. Some players who were world class in the early 1940s never got a World Cup appearance. That alone changed football history. And indeed, World War II didn't kill football, but it forced it to change. It turned league into regional competitions, it created guest players, it destroyed stadiums like Old Trafford, it split countries like France and Italy, it allowed propaganda football in Germany, and it produced legendary matches like Kiev 1942. And when the war ended, football returned bigger than ever, because people needed it.